Hey everyone, I'm Jason Weiser.
And I'm Carissa Weiser.
And you may know us from our award-winning podcast, Myths and Legends, but now we've partnered with Cast Media to create a new podcast called Scoundrel, History's Forgotten Villains, a series that tells the true stories of some of yesterday's most fascinating, forgotten bad guys.
For example, you'll follow the career of Sidney Gottlieb, not only learning that through Sidney and his CIA team, the U.S. literally sanctioned mind control experiments and torture. But the story will open a window allowing you to really feel what Cold War America was like.
Each episode will feature a new villain and a new time period you may not have heard about, but really should.
So if you like crime, evildoers, and the darker parts of history, join us on Cast Media's new podcast, Scoundrel, History's Forgotten Villains, every week, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, everyone. Sean Kipe here. Due to the overwhelming number of calls, messages, and tips we've already received, we've decided to release the first 6 episodes today in their entirety for everyone. No premium subscriptions needed. We want everyone to be caught up and on the same page. My investigation is now happening live in real time. So stay tuned for new episodes in the coming weeks as we get closer and closer every day to finally getting justice for Rhonda.
Anchor Karen Akar, Chris Holcomb with the weather, and Brad Bibb with sports. Middle Georgia's first choice in news.
Church in South Georgia bid an emotional goodbye today to a teenager found brutally murdered earlier this week. Funeral services were held this afternoon for Rhonda Coleman at a Baptist church in Hazlehurst. The 18-year-old was supposed to be with friends in graduation ceremonies next week, but instead today her family and friends gathered to say goodbye. 11 Alive's Renee Chenault is in Hazlehurst and joins us live now. And Renee, are police making...
The community of Hazlehurst was reeling in the wake of Rhonda Coleman's murder. Time seemed to stand still. Family, friends, and strangers alike, it seemed, had still not processed the fact that this wasn't just a bad dream, a nightmare. It was real. And Rhonda really was gone. The town of Hazlehurst may not have been just mourning the death of one of its own, but also the end of an era, the era of leaving your doors unlocked and trusting everyone. Rhonda's funeral service was held at the Southside Baptist Church in Hazlehurst on a sunny Wednesday afternoon, just days after her body was found. Milton and Gail share little of what they remember of that day, and I don't press for more, because I can feel the weight of the sadness come crashing down around them, and it didn't feel right to ask them to relive the worst day of their lives on my account. Truthfully, the day must have been somewhat of a blur to them.
Very, very large turnout. Had it at Southside Church, the funeral, and it was standing room only. I mean, people outside couldn't even get into church. So many people there.
Good evening, Lisa. We're coming to you across the street from the Southside Baptist Church in Hazlehurst, the site of today's funeral. The murder of Rhonda Sue Coleman has had a very big emotional impact on virtually every resident here in Jeff Davis County. And this afternoon, those emotions became evident at her funeral. Local residents filled the town's largest church as over 1,000 people turned out to mourn the loss of 18-year-old Rhonda Sue Coleman. The hearse carrying her body made its way up Cromartie Street towards the church. Her entire senior class served as honorary pallbearers for the service. Inside, tears were pouring down the faces of those in attendance as a student read aloud a poem Rhonda wrote last month. Rhonda's teacher and also a pastor spoke of how concerned Rhonda was for her friends and how she loved others and how others loved her. That love, he says, was shown this week by the black ribbons on local stores and the fact that all Hazlehurst business closed for her funeral.
Over 1/3 of the population of Hazlehurst attended Rhonda's funeral. Nearly every business closed for the day, and practically every door in town donned a black ribbon as a sign of mourning. Jeff Davis High School, along with local government buildings, flew their flags at half-mast in remembrance of Rhonda. Parts of the funeral service were even televised locally.
At a packed funeral service, classmates and co-workers joined to mourn the untimely death of the student who was to graduate from high school in 2 weeks. She was remembered as a person who always put others first.
Rhonda loved life. Rhonda was full of life. Rhonda loved people.
Rhonda was surrounded by thousands of beautiful, fresh flowers, and a framed picture of her sat on top of the pearl-white casket adorned with bronze fittings. Darlene Jacobs remembers what a confusing, heartbreaking time this was.
I mean, it was just a bad day for everybody that was there. If you've ever seen the pictures of that church, there was no room to put anybody else. And it is a big church. I still attend church there, and it'll hold 650 people comfortably. But we have way, way more people in there than that. I mean, people came from everywhere. Well, Milton and Gill both have large families. Everybody knew them. And then you got all these kids from school. And so, yeah, it was a big to-do.
Amidst a hushed silence, the body of 18-year-old Rhonda Sue Coleman was carried into Southside Baptist Church. The tears flowed freely for Rhonda Sue, for her unrealized dreams and lost potential. At times, the pain seemed too much to bear.
The grief-stricken family of Rhonda Coleman gathered to bid a final farewell to the slain teenager, an outpouring of anguish and sorrow that is being shared by an entire community. In doorsteps of buildings everywhere around this small Georgia town, black ribbons hang as both a memorial to the popular teenager and a reminder that her killer is still on the loose. Investigators say the case is baffling.
On Wednesday, May 23, 1990, Rhonda Sue Coleman was laid to rest at Satilla Free Will Baptist Church Cemetery in Hazlehurst. I watched some of the funeral service I had converted from an old VHS tape the Coleman family gave me. And like any funeral, it was filled with sorrow and heartache, tears and blank stares of confusion. What stuck out to me the most, other than the images of the completely grief-stricken Milton and Gail, who were so distraught they could barely walk without leaning on one another, were Rhonda's classmates. Just a few weeks before Rhonda's death, another classmate, Jason Wooten, had died in a car accident. This hit me hard, because I'd actually lost someone the same way when I was in high school. A friend named Karis Hyrick, who I'd known since the 3rd grade, was killed in a car accident when we were 17. She was the first person I'd ever known that had died, and she was our age, a kid. I remember the look on the faces of my classmates in the halls the day we heard the news. Even the kids that didn't know her struggled with these same emotions. It just felt so unnatural to bury a child like this. It goes against the natural order of things, especially under Rhonda's circumstance. And for many of her classmates, they weren't only losing 2 friends in a short period of time. Many of them were, for the first time, facing their own mortality. Tracy Slater was a friend of Rhonda's and attended the funeral.
Jason died on April 1st. And then when Rhonda died in May, and then when we graduated, they actually set seats for both of them and presented their parents their diplomas. And so not only did you go through both of the funerals, and then our graduation basically kind of was an extension of one. It was just so heavy and sad.
But even as the funeral took place, the full-scale investigation continued. The GBI actually patrolled the parking lot and took pictures of cars, looking for the tires that matched the plaster cast of the tracks taken from the abduction site. They took a copy of the guest book because they felt it was likely that since Rhonda almost certainly knew her killer, the person, or people, might be in attendance of the funeral.
Meanwhile, the investigation into Rhonda's murder is continuing, as evidenced by several GBI agents who were taking pictures with home video cameras outside the church. Authorities say they have no firm suspects at this point, but they do say they have a number of leads to follow.
Some students even heard rumors that there might be an arrest made at the funeral, but no such thing happened. The day ended as it began, in sadness Rhonda really was gone. But something stuck with me thinking about what had happened. Was there more than one person involved in Rhonda Coleman's death? And if so, who? Earlier, Milton had mentioned a man named John. And again, only using first names here to protect their privacy for now. But John, like Greg, was a few years older than Rhonda. And John's name came up in interviews with multiple sources I spoke with over the course of several months. Why? Both men would have been about 23 at the time. But unlike Greg, who really didn't have a bad reputation with most people told me John was aggressive and a bit of an outsider. He was a person of interest very early on in the investigation because he and Rhonda had a recent altercation. This was reported to the GBI and police by several of Rhonda's friends and family when the initial investigation began. The alleged confrontation was due to the fact that John was dating Rhonda's best friend, Treese, at the time, and was allegedly controlling and abusive to her, something Rhonda wouldn't stand for. And Gail Coleman remembers this.
I'm sure they had words because she got in his face about, from what she would say, that he would actually slap, push, knock Treese around. And Rhonda would get in his face. She did not like him, and I'm sure he didn't like Rhonda.
Milton and Gail told me that the altercation between Rhonda and John were partly because Rhonda's senior class had planned a cruise to the Bahamas to take place shortly after graduation, and John was vehemently against Treese going. He was said to be jealous and controlling too. This caused friction between John and Rhonda because she was trying to convince Treese to leave John and to go on the cruise. I've contacted Treese to get her take on this, but haven't gotten a response yet. The Colemans say that it's rare for her to talk about this part of her life. I did speak with Tracy Slater about this, though, and she knew about the confrontations between Rhonda and John. She also shares her insight on what John was like.
You know the person that you see and you know him by name, but you don't know him because he always just kind of was the person who never engaged in conversations, never, even when there was a group of people around, he never participated in a conversation. It was almost like he would be the person leaning against the vehicle, just observing, to the point that it made you uncomfortable. Very much so an outsider, and to the point, like, it wasn't like a guy that you're seeing just check out some girl. It wasn't that kind of staring. It was, you just always felt like he was, I don't know, and it made you uncomfortable. It was just odd.
Why would there be a conflict between John and Rhonda?
Well, because Rhonda, and anybody would say this, Rhonda was feisty, and she wasn't the person that was she wasn't going to mince words, and if she thought it, she was going to tell you, and she told him exactly what she thought, and that she thought he was controlling, and that she thought that he was, out of line, and he didn't like that. He wanted, from my standpoint, he wanted that control. He wanted to be where he could isolate her. I just think he was one of those people, and of course, as you grow up as adults, you realize that, but when you're a teenage kid, you don't. It all goes back to he was just very insecure and extremely jealous. And it was jealous whether it was a guy, whether it was a girl, it didn't matter. If they were taking her time, he didn't like that. If he couldn't be there, he didn't like that.
I asked Tracy if she'd ever witnessed any of the abusive or aggressive behavior that others had told me about John.
Now, Rhonda and I had talked about it. I personally never saw it myself, so I can't say that. Now, I have seen him verbally with one of his girlfriends, but I have never seen him physically. But I do know that Rhonda and Tree were very close, and I know that Rhonda had a lot of concerns.
Could he really have been so jealous over something as petty as not wanting his girlfriend to go on a senior cruise? Could he really have had such an issue with Rhonda arguing with him about this to kill her? I'm continuing to pursue an on-the-record comment from Treese. Her knowledge of what happened is too important to ignore. But as for John, I want to know more about why he was named a person of interest from the start, other than the altercations with Rhonda he may have had. And it turns out, there is more. A lot more. From Imperative Entertainment, this is Fox Hunter.
How many free trial subscriptions end up costing you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, long after forgetting to cancel? Fight back against scammy subscriptions with Truebill. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with Truebill. Because companies make subscriptions so hard to cancel, Truebill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts, and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. And your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel any unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. Truebill has over 2 million users and helped save them over $100 million. Like Jennifer B., who says, "With your help, our family has saved $587 per year on unnecessary subscriptions. I really didn't understand how Truebill could help me until we decided to save for a very large home purchase." So don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/truecrime. Go right now. Truebill.com/truecrime. It could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/truecrime.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Well, of course you would. After all, who doesn't love a great deal, right? And when it comes to great rates on insurance for all the things in your life, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners, condo, or renters coverage. You could save even more with a special discount when you bundle your coverages. Plus, the easy-to-use Geico mobile app available 24-hour roadside assistance and more. And choosing to switch to Geico becomes an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you can save with great rates and discounts. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com to get a rate quote or contact your local agent and get started seeing how much you could save.
I attended the FBI National Academy in 1993. I was very fortunate to get to go from a small town to the National Academy and be a graduate there.
That's retired Hazlehurst Police Chief Steve Land. He's worked closely over the years with the Coleman family and has played an integral role in keeping the investigation active as much as he can. We spoke through a series of interviews, and he shared with me his original notes from the investigation.
I took death investigation as one of my courses, and I had obtained a copy of the GBI's full report and all the photographs of this case, and I took it to Quantico with me and presented it as my case study. And my whole class listened to me present the case.
The class Steve Land took gave him an opportunity to present the case with not only his peers, but a room full of FBI investigators. They used their combined experience to pseudo-solve the case based on the information and evidence that Steve provided. I met up with Mr. Land when I made my second trip down to Hazlehurst from Atlanta in March, and we talked for several hours.
I presented this to my death investigation class, just like a district attorney would, or to a grand jury. My class voted, said John did the crime. He had motive and opportunity. And from the evidence you presented here to the class, that's who we think did it.
Steve Land was a part of the initial investigation and is very familiar with the case and the allegations.
He was jealous. Rhonda had talked his girlfriend to going on the cruise with the senior class, and he says no, she wasn't going. And Rhonda said to the friend, "Tell him you're going anyway." And allegedly that conversation got really volatile with him and the girlfriend. And one of the conversations was that he went to Rhonda and said, "You will convince her not to go." And she told him to take a flying leap.
Why was Rhonda going on the senior cruise such a big deal to John?
And she worked at Piggly Wiggly. She dealt with a lot of folks.
And for those of you that don't know, Piggly Wiggly is a small chain of supermarkets in the South. Hey, it's a Southern thing. What more can I say?
And, there was allegations that he came in Piggly Wiggly and confronted her there on the job. And I don't know if there was any follow-up to that or not. But that would be the motive, is jealousy with the girlfriend. Years later, he allegedly held a pair of scissors to the girlfriend's throat and threatened to kill her. And she did a taped interview with one of my officers.
The officer that Steve is referring to is John Lee, and he tells me a bit about this incident.
We were contacted, and I stopped him, and at that time I placed him under arrest and transported him up there to the office, to the police station, and interviewed him right in the jail itself. He tried to run her off the road, and I think his intentions may very well have been to kill her.
But there was no evidence to convict John of a crime because there were no witnesses, and he was released.
So I had a VHS tape, and I kept that in the evidence for years and years and years. Best I recall, one of the assistant district attorneys came to my office. It was either an assistant DA or the GBI, and said, "I want that VHS tape. It needs to go to the sheriff's office." I never heard another word out of it.
John actually worked in the timber industry in 1990, and part of his job was helping to clear-cut trees. Clear-cutting is basically just what it sounds like. It's the practice in which all trees in an area are uniformly cut down to make way for planting select species of trees. They do this so that the trees will be even-aged and spaced when harvested up to 30 years later, and they'll get processed for any number of different products, paper, mulch, whatever. John's job was to go in after the clear cut and clean up all the small stuff. As it turns out, John had just a couple months prior clear cut the field where Rhonda's body was found. I've heard this from numerous sources, including the Colemans, Steve Land, and former GBI agents that worked the case. I've been by there, and talk about being off the beaten path. This place is in the middle of nowhere. There's really nothing around for miles, even today. Though in 1990, the field where rows of trees now exist would have been recently leveled. It's not a place you would just stumble upon, especially in the dark.
And the prime suspect had cut timber in that area. He was familiar with where her body was located.
Steve explains the very simple reason as to why this is key.
Because criminals go to familiar territory.
Criminals of certain types of crimes are likely to return to areas they're familiar with. If someone was to, say, need to dispose of a body, they would likely go to an area they know of that is secluded, where they may be able to easily hide a body. Since 2001, Kevin Boyer and Patrick Flynn at the University of Notre Dame's Computer Science and Engineering Department have been studying this very concept and working on image-based biometrics and facial recognition, in part to catch criminals who return to the scene of the crime. It's that prevalent. Of course, this did us no good in 1990 or out in this secluded, wooded area.
Another piece of evidence was that John drove I believe it was a Chevrolet or GMC pickup truck, and it had tiger paw tires on it. And there was a plaster cast taken at the scene where the body was located, and it was determined that that's the same kind of tires he had on his truck, and that was never followed through on.
At one point, John's truck was seized by investigators, though nothing was found. I was told by a source that he had new tires put on by this point, and that the Uniroyal tiger paws were destroyed or could not be found. This is extremely odd. Who destroys old tires when they get new ones? But here's what we know so far about John. He and Rhonda had been arguing about the senior cruise. Because of his job, he knew the area, the fields where Rhonda's body was found, very well. And the tires on his truck matched those of the plaster cast made at the abduction site. And Steve Land tells me another detail too.
Also, another element that was screwed up on the deal was he had a chainsaw and a can of gas in the back of his pickup truck. That, to my knowledge, that gas was never tested against what was on her body.
The accelerant used to partially burn Rhonda's body was a mixture of gas and oil, which you would use for a variety of lawn maintenance products, like a leaf blower, a weed whacker, or a chainsaw. But investigators never compared the accelerant in the gas can in the bed of John's truck to that from Rhonda's burned body.
And her body was not burned beyond recognition. I don't know if they told you that or not, but her body was slightly burned. It was not totally disfigurement. I think it was panic and uncertainty of, well, I'm going to try and get rid of the body, and they just threw a little on her and then set it on fire and took off in a panic. And it very well could have been accidental, and we've talked about that numerous times, and there's a great possibility, but knowing John had a temper like he had, it may not have been.
This is just one of a number of leads that law enforcement has followed over so many years. But again, no arrests were ever made. The case is still open, with few new leads coming in.
We all want love, that happily ever after feeling of finding your soulmate. What if someone not only claimed they could help you find that perfect partner, they guaranteed it? Jeff and Shalia, a young couple famous on YouTube, teach about twin flames, a deep romantic connection with your perfect ultimate partner in their videos. It's a divine love. You're designed for no one else, and they're designed for no one else. But the path to finding your twin flame isn't so simple. Those who start to doubt the group are instructed to cut ties with friends and family that are holding them back and to corner and claim their twin flame through stalking and intimidation. By the time some members are able to leave the group, they don't even recognize themselves, and the harassment to rejoin makes them fear for their safety. From Wondery, Twin Flames is a podcast about what happens when the quest for love turns into a dangerous obsession. Follow Twin Flames on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
It starts out as, I want to get on to you about my girlfriend going on the cruise. I want you to do this, and it gets out of hand from there. He grabs her, and she's fighting. So what's he going to do? He's going to get reported, and he's going to get arrested. So he's freaking out, and the more she fights, the tighter he's squeezing. So with positional asphyxiation, she eventually quits breathing.
Though no official cause of death has ever been released to the public, several former law enforcement officials I spoke to said that it was either strangulation or positional asphyxia. Positional asphyxia occurs when someone's position prevents the person from breathing adequately. People may die from positional asphyxia accidentally, when the mouth and nose are blocked, or where the chest may be unable to fully expand. You could say suffocating someone, even if by accident.
Well, then he panics, and where's he going to go? It wasn't like you take him down in the swamp. It's like the pickup backed up there in a panic mode. We dump the body out, pour a little gas, set it on fire, and we take off. But those two people would have had to, they do what many criminals do, they panic. And first instinct is to go to real familiar territory. And then you get second guessing yourself, well, I better not do this here, go someplace else. 40 years of experience, criminals go back to familiar territory.
Every time I think, oh, that's the smoking gun, I realize that investigators looked into that maybe 20 or 30 years ago. As recently as 2018, the GBI started asking questions and interviewing people like Tracy Slater and Layla Miller again. But still no arrests. And as I got deeper into my investigation of John, I was also told that John's brother had been involved in a violent and abusive relationship with a woman. I spoke to that woman's sister, Tish.
My sister just passed away last year from Alzheimer's, but she was married to one of his brothers, and he was a mean ass. All those brothers were known to be mean asses. Like, I saw his brother, who was older, because my sister broke up with him, come by. I mean, I was like maybe in the 8th grade, bust all her windows out in my mom's driveway, stick a gun down her throat in front of her kids.
The eyewitness account of Tish's is burned into her brain. Though she was young at the time, it's something she'll never forget.
And busted out all her windows, stalker and everything like that. Yeah, I mean, just crazy shit. Yeah, unfortunately, she was married to him, and she never wanted to talk about it. One thing that my sister did tell me when Rhonda died, and we found out he was one of the suspects, she said, and his only alibi was his mama. And my sister said, Tish, their mom will lie for them to the day she dies.
Tish is right when she says that John's only alibi was that his mother said he was home asleep when Rhonda's abduction occurred. This was the alibi that numerous law officials confirmed they heard as well.
What I was told was 2 weeks before Rhonda passed, he said that the reason why him and his girlfriend broke up was because of Rhonda Coleman, and he would get the bitch back.
But another part of this story that stands out to me is the cries for help that the fox hunters heard. Because it could have all turned around right there if the men had only acted that night. The fox hunters might have been the best hope for Rhonda if she indeed was the person they heard screaming. So what happened to them? I wanted to talk to these hunters, but unfortunately, all 3 of those men have since passed away. However, I was able to track down a nephew of one of them.
Only thing that I'm telling you is what I know that was told to me, not speculation.
That's Zach Marchett. His uncle was Roger Marchett, who along with 2 other men were hunting fox not far from where Rhonda's car was found. There was only one lone dirt road that cut through that forested area.
I can tell you that he told me he was fox hunting out on Henson Farm Road, and that's real close to where they had found her car at. And he said during that time, a truck rode by them on the road, and there was a female hollered, "Help, help." But he said, at the time I really didn't think that much about it because of kids being kids and do crazy stuff all the time. Well, the next day or two, whenever I found out she was missing, it all kind of, and where they found her car, it all kind of come back together. Just from what my uncle said, he felt pretty confident that was her in the truck, but he didn't know that, obviously he didn't know that. It made sense with the timeline of where he was at in relationship to her vehicle when she went missing. And he talked to the GBI or the county sheriffs or whoever was in charge of that. I don't remember who it was. He even told me what color the truck was, but I cannot remember for the sake of my soul what color it was and what kind it was or anything, because I tried to. I really thought through this thing really hard trying to figure out why I couldn't remember, but at 31 years, I guess, or however long it's been.
And that's a big part of the problem right there. It's been so long that the people who were in their 30s or 40s in 1990 are now well into their twilight years. Memories fade, facts get mixed up, names and dates get fuzzy, and people pass away.
I do remember, and this is, he said, she said, this is a dead man, he's my uncle or whatever, but he told me who he thought it was, and he thought it was John. And he swore to that to the day he died. He thought it was his truck. He told me the color of it, the make of it.
But did Roger Marchett know John well enough to positively ID him as he drove by in his truck at night?
Well, my uncle owned a feed store, so I'm sure that everybody had done business with him for buying dog feed or feed and seed, that kind of stuff. I think he knowed of him, in small towns like that, everybody kind of knowed everybody,
Sounds strange if you live in a metropolitan city, but growing up in a small town, roughly the size of Hazlehurst myself, I can say that that's really how it is, or was back then. Even Layla Miller mentioned that the kids would cruise the town's main drag and hang out at night. When you cruised by and saw someone's car you knew in a parking lot, you pulled in to hang out. I know this because I did it in high school. But as Zach and I keep talking about John, he surprised me when I asked him who he thought killed Rhonda.
I'd probably have to lean to what my uncle said. I would put probably more belief in that. Now, did he probably do it by himself, or was there somebody else? I'm sure. And this guy's passed away also, but I'd say Mickey Beecher. You've probably heard that name.
Sure, I've heard that name. The flag painting party was at his house the night Rhonda disappeared. Zach Marchett is maybe the 6th person who's mentioned Mickey's name as someone they feel could be connected to Rhonda's death in some way. But not until Zach mentioned his name did I hear this.
He had a big crush on her. Big crush.
But it wasn't just Mickey Beecher, Zach says, who had a crush on Rhonda.
Him and a guy Mickey Beecher and another guy, and I think he's still alive. His name's Shane. We had a class together, and yeah, both of those guys were pretty obsessed with her.
A crush is one thing, but obsessed? What does that mean?
That's just a classmate looking in. You know what I'm saying? Saying those other 2 names. Now I'm just, and both of them had a pretty bad drug problem, and one of them dead from it. So a lot of times they might have carried that to the grave with them.
Maybe that's true. But one thing I do know for sure is that Greg and John are both still alive and well. And sooner or later, I'm going to have to find a way to talk to both of them. Fox Hunter is a production of Imperative Entertainment. It was created, written, and reported by me, Sean Kipe, and I wrote the original music score. Executive producers are Jason Hoke and Gino Falsetto. Story editor is Jason Hoke. Sound engineering by Shane Freeman. Key cover art provided by Joe Freeman Jr. Keychalis 9032 2015. JoeFreemanJr.com. Fox Hunter is a 10-episode series available every Tuesday morning. Follow us on social media at Fox Hunter Podcast. If you like the show, leave us a review and tell your friends. Thanks for listening.